Hello, everybody. This is Nick Newman with the Conscienticon, where we share practical, spiritual, occult wisdom. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about Carl Jung and his theory of the collective unconscious. So back in the day, when people had mental issues or bad thoughts or bad vibes or spirits like this, bad spirits within them, their options were basically to talk to other people about that. And the idea is that if there is something going on with my simulator, let's call it my brain, my mind, my conscious configuration of what I think reality is, if there's something off there, I can check with another mind, see what their configuration or their ideas of what reality is or should be, and compare those realities, and then hopefully iron out whichever one is wrong, right? And then get yourself some perspective. And a lot of the times it's just finding out that what you think is something wrong with you is something shared, that everybody bothers everybody, right? And so there was a time around the Victorian era where people quit talking to each other. And there was a need, because of class differences, there was a need to go out and pretend to be something that you're not and never fully connect with another human being. Because again, it'd be one thing, you and I right now exist as personas. This is Nick, a persona of the guy that runs a YouTube channel. And you would, if you met me initially, you would show me a persona, just a social mask. I wouldn't really know you truly, but it would be different if me and you were in the woods and to survive, we had to go catch a deer or something. We would bond, and inevitably we'd be checking realities with each other by sharing stories. And for some reason, humans quit doing that, or they were put in social situations where they maybe were part of a family but could never reveal their true inner aspects of their psyche. And we could go down many different rabbit holes of why this was. But the big deal, this was the breakthrough back in the 1920s when Freud and Jung founded analytical psychology. It was a big deal and kind of a joke at the same time, in that you could cure people's mental disorders just by talking to them. And it's a joke because it's such a simple thing, but it's not a joke, because talking and communicating with other minds seems to help iron out minds in general. It's always good for somebody to check their reality. And I think that's what's going on when it comes to psychoanalysis. And another fun thing to think about is just them sharing information. Just a client sharing information with you would be enough sometimes for that client to just iron out mental problems themselves, because maybe they just haven't actually constructed their thoughts in a way that made some sort of sense that allows people to take actions and actually fix those thoughts. So before analytical psychology, you could basically talk to a friend, or you could go to church, or you could go, if you were Catholic, you could confess. And that's the kind of thing about it that seems to be unanimous. And Jung wrote this, that whenever communicating with a client, he had to, no matter what they told him, no matter what horrible thing the client would tell them that they did or thought, he could not show disgust or disdain towards that individual, because if he ever did, that individual would shut down. They wouldn't tell him anymore. And then essentially they couldn't be cured. They couldn't actually get over whatever ailment they had. And so it's important. And I thought that was kind of neat, is that the only kind of love and exception you get like that would be from maybe a mother or a father or a direct sibling in a tribe, something like that, or a priest in a confession booth who has sworn an oath to never tell anybody what you say. And so now you've got another scenario where you have somebody that you are supposed to be able to fully trust. And that's important because you, you can't This isn't something you can kind of half-ass. You tell people your trouble genuinely, and maybe through just telling them you get ironed out, but then they go back in with the feedback, or they prod and ask you questions that help you develop your own plans further. And this is what Jung and Freud started doing back in the early 20s. And it was revolutionary. It was a breakthrough, because finally men came to the conclusion that talking out problems was maybe a good idea, right? So if talking to somebody cured their mental ailments or their illness, then that would allude to a fact that there was some sort of matrix within every human being that was a web, a mind. And so if this is true, if there's some sort of mind, there's some sort of program running in this big meat machine, then that mind has to have some sort of a structure. And this is the beginning of Freud and Jung separating. So Freud is very, very popular. He's popular because his ideas are very simple. He had the idea of the id, the ego, and the superego. And to briefly explain that to anybody who hasn't learned what that is, the id is the primal part of yourself. It's the bestial part of your nature. It's the part of you that likes violence and likes sex and likes eating a bunch of stuff. And it's the animal. The ego is the conscious part of yourself that thinks it's you. And the superego is everything that you think you ought to be, all the expectations that you think you should live up to. And these expectations are designed by the society or the culture that you're around. It's what you, it is the mold that the ego is trying to fit into whilst fulfilling the primal needs of the id. So it's a very simple thing, and that's why it was so profound. And on top of that, Freud had become super popular because his theory involved a lot of sex. And he put this out during a period where sexual stuff was hush hush. Okay. So you couldn't just go out in the street and talk about things like this, because it was kind of coming out of the Victorian era. So people were very closed off. Women never showed ankles, kind of thing like this. And so to have a doctor come out and say, you know what our problem is as a society, is part of our problem is that we're so sexually repressed. And so that took off like wildfire, and it was provocative. It was like the thing, you know, a kind of a taboo thing. It sit on something called an Overton window. An Overton window is a concept of, out of all the topics that you can potentially converse with somebody about, the Overton window is the edge of what's acceptable. And in anything outside of that would be considered taboo. And the further you go, the more seriously taboo it is. So like if I were to meet a stranger and for some reason start talking about rape or something like this, that's so outside of the Overton window that that person would consider me maybe crazy, because there was something wrong with me, that I don't get the current meta. I don't get what's acceptable. So to hang out with me, they would be risking embarrassment. And so Freud found or presented an idea of the mind, which had sexuality as its core, that sat right on the edge of the Overton window, right on the edge. So it was like, ooh, this guy's on the edge of something. This guy is cool. Now, that was something that Jung didn't completely agree with. He didn't agree with sexuality being such a big part of the psyche. He believed it was part of the psyche, part of the psychic structure, but he didn't believe it was as much of a driver as Freud believed it was. But our boy Jung decided to dive deep into the occult and mysticism and things like this. So in Jung's attempt to create a structured map of the mind or the psyche, he decided to dive into more occult ideas and more mystic ideas, more religious ideas, pulling these these structures from stories and then creating a map of the mind. And part of that map was the collective unconscious, a theory of the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious, at first, people think they get it completely wrong. They believe that the collective unconscious is referring to some sort of a hive mind network. That's what I thought initially when I was reading it, that he was talking about some sort of data pool that we're all pulling ideas from, and thoughts and dreams are coming from this. But it's not like that at all. The collective unconscious is referring to human beings and their tendency to manifest archetypical thoughts, dreams, and behavior patterns, and that these were manifest as part of our evolution, their ancestral memory. And he actually refers to it as ancestral memory. So we're thinking more like Assassin's Creed. When he goes back in the Animus and he relives his life, more like that, in that all of us as humanity stem from the same ancestors. So whatever those ancestors had to endure and the memories that they had to exchange have now propagated to us now. And so when you have nightmares about a friend betraying you, that nightmare might manifest as a snake biting your heel. That nightmare might involve the moon, which is a symbol for lunacy. So there's moon, luna, lunacy, lunatic. So Jung developed a map of the mind that was adaptive, in the sense that anyone could adapt to certain situations in life and manifest personality traits that were aligned with archetypical characters. We have pre-programs that we can run that help us adapt to all sorts of situations. So Freud and Jung inevitably fell out of friendship, as far as I know. And it was partly due to this idea that Jung was dealing with mysticism. In fact, there was a letter written to Jung from Freud that said, I am aware that you are driven by innermost inclination to the study of the occult, and I am sure you will return home richly laden. I cannot argue with that. It is always right to go where your impulses lead. So this is kind of a warning, like, man, you're learning, or you're diving into places that the mainstream does not like. That Overton window thing, we're jumping outside of it. And when you come back with theories that you come up with from religious ideas or a theological study or study about myths, the mainstream is just going to think maybe you're a witch or something, and maybe you're a Satan worshiper, and they're not going to take you seriously. And on top of that, nothing that you're claiming can be empirically studied. And so Jung just didn't believe that. And I don't believe that personally. I believe that there are things that are true about reality that cannot be tested or really proven. They just are. Kind of like, I can't prove that you are conscious at all. I can't really prove that. But you know, as a creature that experiences, that you're conscious. And because everyone claims that, we say that's evidence to support something that can truly never be proven. What I think is really profound about Jung's work is that there are really things that you can take away and actually use. One of the techniques that came from Jung's work is something called shadow integration. Part of Jung's map of the collective unconscious consisted of the persona, or a social mask, the shadow, which is the unconscious aspects of the personality, the anima or animus, the feminine and masculine aspects of the psyche, the hero, the wise old man, the trickster, and possible infinite other archetypes. So this leads to ideas about therapeutic techniques such as shadow integration, which I have a video on shadow integration that you guys can check out if you wish. Many people said that Carl Jung had a twinkle in his eye. This is something that Alan Watts said. This is something that Joseph Campbell said. And they were saying that essentially this guy was totally individuated in the sense that he actually accepted all of the nasty parts of himself and all the good parts of himself. And he accepted all of these. So he was always at home within his own mind. And the books that Jung produced as he aged were absolutely incredible works. They were works about him actually taking time, meditating, and talking to beings that manifested within his dreams and within his mind. And then he would take that and he would write about those stories and then analyze where these characters came from and would connect it to mythology and to theology and all these other ideas. One of the things that he would talk about is the devil, for example, that every human being had a devil within them, and that if you were to meet this devil, then it would terrify you and at first, but then upon accepting this devil, you would be relieved, you would be released. On top of this, many companies use what's called archetype branding to brand products to get specific types of consumers interested in products. My favorite example is how Jeep uses the Explorer archetype and brands towards people who are adventurous. So in the commercials you see these Jeeps going over mountains and going off terrain because it's trying to get people who are really adventurers excited about that product because that's their main target audience, it's their target market. The collective unconscious is a common pattern of pre-programming that almost every human being has, and they're just not aware that they have it. So an example would be, if we could run such an experiment, we couldn't because it would be unethical. But if we took a bunch of kids, right, threw them in the woods and had them survive and never let them communicate with the outside world, we would assume that upon interacting with them as they aged, we would find out that they would invent things that were archetypical human things. And these things that they would invent would be ideas. And some of these ideas would be monsters with talons and fangs and wings, and maybe they breathe fire. So Jung believed that these patterns were passed on to everybody so we could survive better, and that we could have an anchor to share language and information, not only with other people, but to ourselves. So to me, the conscious mind is the ever-changing moment. It's you and me right now, existing, experiencing right now. We can't jump to the future and we can't go to the past. We are chained to the ever-changing now, and we always fully identify with that. And this identification with the consistent now and our past is our ego, right? It is our sense of self. It is our sense of where we are in space and time and who we are. And the subconscious mind is a pool of data processing. It's subconscious because if it were to become something that you were aware of, it would actually slow you down. So the subconscious mind takes in data from the environment, distills it, feeds it to the conscious mind through thoughts. And on top of that, the conscious mind is taking in all this other sensory information and processing that as well, and allowing you to be a character with a narrative, which allows you to function. And the subconscious mind is also always taking in the data that the conscious mind is taking in. And in order to heal itself, in order to change its own narrative, whenever we sleep and we dream, the brain goes through many chemical changes. It actually cleans itself out as we sleep. It cannot be a coincidence that every creature with a functioning brain like ours has to sleep. And that shows you that the process of sleep and dreaming are absolutely critical for our survival. There's something about it that allows us to survive. And from my understanding, as a being that experiences dreams. I'm lucky enough to experience dreams. Some people never experience their own dreams. There could be many reasons for that, but most people dream. And I believe what's going on is the subconscious mind is feeding the conscious mind, the now, data, creating its own simulations. And this simulation allows the conscious mind to develop a new narrative for itself, a narrative that's going to make it more probable that you survive. So it might give you nightmares, which would make you averse to risky situations, or it might give you dreams that make you maybe more prone to take risk, make you try a little bit, having dreams about that dream girl out there that you need to ask out. So the subconscious mind is trying to correct the narrative of the conscious mind. And Jung believed that this subconscious mind was made up of all sorts of little micro personalities that were filtering, battling each other for dominance, battling their way to conscious reality. Because you and I are really a huge amalgam of a whole bunch of little things that are working together to create one thing that thinks it's unified. And that, my friends, concludes this episode of the Conscienticon, and I hope I've brought you closer to an understanding of the unconscious. And if you really like this content, please comment, like, and subscribe. And if you really, really, really like this content, become a patron where you'll get access to free ebooks and videos that I produce that are private there that talk about all sorts of things, how I make videos, certain ideas that we're on. And I'm hoping that that community grows into something where ideas within it are self-cycled and transmute into something that is far beyond anything I can fathom now. But if you're interested, check that out. And I thank you all for being here and helping us support the spread of practical, spiritual, occult wisdom.